Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along to the Safeguarding Overview and Scrutiny Committee. A special welcome and thank you to Tim Moss, Assistant Director, Lead for Education, and also to the Reverend Metcalfe, who was the author of the report that we'll consider at item 4. So thank you very much for coming along. Item 1 then, apologies.
We have apologies this morning, Chair, from Councillor Mrs Perry, Councillor Mrs Eagland and Councillor Connor Wildman.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? No. Has anyone had the opportunity to read the minutes of the last meeting held on the 5th of January? Are we all happy that I can sign them off? Thank you. And then into item 4, the executive response to the report of the Spotlight Review on Sexual Harassment in Schools, which was January last year. I'm sure members are aware, but this was a report that was in response to, I believe it was Ofsted, who raised the concerns around the potential for sexual harassment in schools. And as a result of that, we had a working day where a variety, quite a large number of professionals were invited along. And under the chairmanship of Reverend Metcalfe, the report was produced. Where we are at the present moment in time with that is around the recommendations that that report produced, and we have cabinet members here to discuss the agreement around some of those, or if not all of those, recommendations. So could I hand over, Mark, to you?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, schools are not passing the book necessarily, but they're mainly in Jonathan's. But obviously, when it comes to safeguarding issues, obviously this goes over into my portfolio. I mean, the appendix there with the list of recommendations has got all the proposed actions and what, and Tim is here who could be able to talk in more detail, particularly if members of the panel of the board have got any particular questions of any of the points there.
Thank you, Councillor Price.
Yeah, just if I can add a little bit to that as well. So, yeah, thank you, Mark. So safeguarding is taken very seriously in Staffordshire, and we see schools as a key partners of the Staffordshire Safeguarding Children's Board. You will see there is a comprehensive report following the Sexual Harassment in Schools Spotlight Review, and as part of the ongoing responsibility of the Education Safeguarding team in Staffordshire, every opportunity is taken to highlight the need to protect children from online peer-to-peer sexual harassment and abuse. You will see that many of the actions have been completed and are also updated on a regular basis. This aspect also is included as a section within the latest Section 175157 Safeguarding Audit education providers are required to complete on an annual basis. This provides further assistance to the Safeguarding Board and identifies any additional support or training that is required. And it is right, of course, that we keep this on our agenda to ensure all children and young people are protected from this type of abuse. And I trust that you will continue to support the actions that we've highlighted today within the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions on that? Councillor McMahon.
First, Chair, my apologies for being late. The piece about a joint letter to government, it doesn't say quite whom. I presume the Secretary of State, and I'm not sure which Secretary of State. It's become my day job to lobby government on the online harms bill, and I'm perfectly happy to meet with the five of you and talk through where I think we are with it. And that might help inform the wording of your letter. The second point is that there's bits of it I didn't quite understand, but I don't believe what it's there, and that is looking at the position for kids and how they are is changing so fast all the time. I mean, TikTok is another step up in the way that these things happen. And I saw nothing about a continual dialogue with children about where they are and where they feel about all this and where they see the threats coming from. Because that ought to inform what we do rather than some structure we have in order to help them, because we need their views in order to inform that structure.
Thank you for that. Can somebody respond? Tim.
So there are a couple of responses to that. So in terms of the PSHE coordinators, so they're working with PSHE coordinators in school, and one of the aspects around that PSHE curriculum and the broader curriculum is around speaking to children and talking to children and young people. There is an expectation that from an education perspective, that those discussions and those conversations take place. We all know the importance of young people's voice, and so there is that particular aspect. But then, I suppose, from a more broader piece of work is the work that we undertake with Skivvy, so that's the Youth Voluntary Service as well. And again, they also have those conversations and discussions with children and young people. And again, there are those opportunities to report that back into through the local authority route.
Thank you for that. Did you want to come back?
I don't want to I don't want to enhance bureaucracy for the sake of it, but there's elements of that we ought to see, because we can't make a judgment about whether what you're doing is the best way forward without that. It's an iterative process, isn't it? And it will keep changing. And I just think not reams, but just some idea of where they are, but particularly what's changing. So what do we, if we knew about, if we were starting to do stuff about TikTok that bit earlier, then perhaps things would be better for kids now than they are. And it's a question of trying to be ahead of the game. And the only way we can be ahead of the game is speak to them. And we need, I think, through you, Chair, we need some sort of sight of that in order to make sense of your proposals.
Thank you for that. I wonder whether your suggestion of another meeting outside of this group with the main people might progress some of that forward in the future. So maybe we could schedule something around that so we can explore that in greater detail. I think Councillor Price was first.
Yeah, just a couple of really quick points. So, no, you're absolutely right. I think getting together would be really useful, and we'll see how we can take that forward. So, yeah, I welcome that. I'm lucky enough to be young enough, he says. I have a 13-year-old in a secondary school still, and I am aware that he already has had sort of that training and advice from within school around mobile phone use, and particularly around social media and things like that as well. And the school is very, very, very on top of it. I'm aware other schools are doing exactly the same thing. Whether it's being done early enough, I'm not so sure, and I think you're right, maybe we need to have a bit more feedback from schools about actually how that works and when that's introduced. So I'll take that forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair. Having been a school governor for 11 years and having a daughter who's a teacher, I know that sexual harassment takes place in all schools, whether they be outstanding or it's category 4, really. Page 16, item 5. Consider the introduction of local designated safeguarding lead meetings. And then I go to the bit in the middle, and it says, education safeguarding leads undertake half-termly briefings, which are open to all schools. But it's obviously on an invite the DSL comes. We've had 2 meetings, 12th of October and the 12th of January this year. Can I ask how many of those DSLs went to the meeting, really? And is there any way we can make it mandatory that the DSL has to go to such meetings and give us a briefing? And when I read things on here as well, it says that we learn from good practice. To me, it's important we learn from bad practice, so that if anything is discussed there, that's bad practice, we can bring it to the council, let other schools know it's bad practice, and then move it all forward.
Thanks, Paul. I don't have the numbers, but we can certainly give the numbers to you because... we can certainly provide that information. They are really well attended, so I don't want to kind of quote figures here, but and where there isn't any attendance, then again, you know, our education safeguarding leads are picking that up with schools. The issue around less effective practice, that will be highlighted. So again, there is always lessons learned. So, however, one of the things that we always want to do, though, is focus on what's working really well. And so, therefore, we should be highlighting how effective practice drives the issues forward, as well as learning from those kind of areas where there was less effective practice. So, rest assured, both of those do take place. The mandatory aspect to this is, no, we cannot mandate it. However, one of the and there's a reference to the, Jonathan made reference to the safeguarding audits. And as part of that safeguarding audit, there is questions in there around where are you getting your training from? How do you, governing body, and you know, I'm pointing back to you now as a governor, because for me, I'll be saying to you, you should be mandating your safeguarding lead to attend designated safeguarding lead training. That's where it needs to be driven from, not from the local authority driving it, because don't forget, if you kind of think 75% of youngsters now attend an academy that has no responsibility, the local authority has no kind of direct responsibility. So again, it's about those academy trusts. The regulator is also, so Ofsted in this sense, goes in and inspects safeguarding and takes safeguarding very seriously, as you've seen from their reports. So again, those questions are asked around, so where are you getting your training from? How do you know it's the most relevant? And what do you do to ensure that you are providing the best practice? So I think there's a challenge back to governors, but also there is other measures that take place to ensure that people are engaging in it.
Just to say, I stood down as governor on the 2nd of January, so I'm no longer the governor there. I did have the lead on safeguarding, and I was never happy that we went far enough in it, really. A lot of the training was online training, which people did. We had the occasional face-to-face, but it was, over those 11 years, it was very, very occasionally it took place. And I really believe that most training for safeguarding should be face-to-face, where you actually go through scenarios, etc., and can ensure that everyone is getting involved in it. It's not just safeguarding leads. Every teacher, every staff member, whether it be a cook, whether it is, they're all responsible for safeguarding the school. They all see things, so that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. That you know, safeguarding is everybody's responsibility, and I agree in terms of that kind of the face-to-face. What I will also say, though, is that training does not necessarily mean delivery. And so one of the things that we're always looking for is about how do we know there's a culture, because that's what we're looking for, that culture of safeguarding, that everybody, you know, irrespective of their role in a school, has that responsibility, because they're there and they're working with children and young people. So we can ensure and we can demand that people do as much training as we can. However, it's about how that is then interpreted and delivered on the ground in the school to make sure that all youngsters, you know, are safe. So I think that it's about culture just as much as it is about training.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Chairman. Item 2 on the action plan talks about the PSHE initiative and being monitored in 12 months' time. My first observation is 12 months too long. Should we not be assessing it earlier than that? And then secondly, in relation to the pilot that Newcastle District undertook, how long has that been in place, and have we taken on board everything that's sort of come from that policy, and are we regularly talking to that to make sure that whatever we do in the initiative that's been put together, that we cover off all perhaps the things that didn't go so well in Newcastle as well as the things that did go well? Thank you.
So just picking up on the detail, I think in terms of when we're delivering anything in terms of reviewing impact, then I think we have to give it the right length of time. Otherwise, we probably don't see the issues that are emerging. But what I will say is, as those projects are developing, that they're learning from them all of the time. So our education safeguarding leads are in direct conversation with those PSHE leads. They're in conversation with the DSLs in schools. So again, all of that learning is always being used to, you know, inform what we do next. So whilst yes, it's 12 months, and I think it's due to report at the end of February. One of the things I would be saying is that there shouldn't be any surprises.
Thank you for that. Councillor Bennett.
I want to talk about the Academy Trusts. I feel that some of these have got too big now, and they're not taking the responsibility for each individual school. I go to take my grandchildren to school 2 or 3 times a week. I listen to things on the playground. I'm also quite involved with the high school where they go to from that school, and they've got a lot of bullying issues and safeguarding things. And I think that these big academy trusts, we've got a chief executive head who's over, I think it's about 10 schools. She flies in, flies out. She doesn't listen to what people are saying, and I think that's one of the things that you need to sort out. And when they're at primary school, they're very shielded, and you've got the safeguarding officer, and they're very good. They're smaller schools, they get more attention, they can see what's going on. They go to high school, and then all of a sudden, the vulnerable children, as well as the streetwise children, are just chucked into this great big environment where they can just do what they want, really. And there's not the amount of staff attention as there is at the primary schools, and that's where all the problems, I think, are stemming from. And I don't know what we can do about it, but I think it's something that you really need to look at.
Thank you. Did we want to come back on that?
In terms of the academy agenda, we obviously know that's a national policy, and it's for regional directors, or as were the regional schools commissioners, to make decisions around how many schools can join an academy trust. So from that perspective, I don't think anybody's made a definitive decision around what the maximum number of schools in a trust is. They're clear around, to some extent, the smaller trusts, and around what should be the minimum. But in terms of kind of from a maximum perspective, there is no definitive answer there. One of the things, again, I would say is that whilst, yes, there's a chief executive that sits across the academy trust, that there is a local academy council, again, kind of pushing it back to those governors in each of those schools, whether it be the governing board, governing body, or, as I say, local academy council. That's that part of the organisation that we're asking for that safeguarding audit on an annual basis. And again, it's for them to assure themselves that the head teacher, because whilst the chief executive is responsible for the academy trust, we still have a head teacher that is still responsible for the running of their school, and it's for the local academy council and the academy trust to assure themselves that what's happening in those schools meets those the criteria around safeguarding. So I think those arrangements are in place. It's just about making sure that people do use it to challenge fairly but robustly, but to ensure that those aspects are being met and dealt with.
Thank you for that. Councillor Price.
Obviously they still fall under the remit of Ofsted and Ofsted inspections as well, and as part of those inspections, parents can get in touch with Ofsted themselves, and if they do have any safeguarding concerns, they can be raised through that avenue too. And obviously Ofsted will look at the school with a fine, like a microscope, and see what's going on within the school itself, and will identify. I mean, if you have high incidents of bullying or issues within a school, you end up with high exclusion rates, fixed term exclusions, managed moves, and high issues around attendance as well. And these are all red flags for issues within the school, and those too will be picked up. So there are various avenues that parents can also get in touch with the school and others to support children and identify those areas of weakness. So if there is issues within those schools, I mean, I don't normally talk about my own child, but I mean, I took him from a primary school of 55 pupils to a secondary academy school of 1,100. So my first instinct was he isn't going to survive. And I have to say that the school have been fantastic. And I've visited numerous secondary schools in and out of academies, although I think we've only got one now, haven't we, Tim, that's no longer...
No, there's a few more.
Yeah, and I have to say the way that they look after the children has been excellent. I've seen no real evidence of any failings, but if we were to be made aware of anything, and if you were aware of anything in particular, then obviously raise it with us. But as Tim has alluded to, under the academy agenda, there's not as much that we can do as perhaps we could do with our own schools.
Thank you for that. Just one point on that. You know, you make the point about individual parents can do that, and picking up on the point that's just been made, and accepting that we have less of an influence over academy setups. Where is the opportunity for a local authority then to raise its collective concerns, if there are any? Is there an organisation or an avenue that perhaps we should be exploring with some of this, rather than encouraging individual parents simply to take it up?
So, yes, there are avenues, and whilst the academy agenda says that the local authority doesn't have direct control, that we are still statutorily responsible for safeguarding. So we have that statutory responsibility. So where there are safeguarding concerns within an academy or a maintained schools, and to be fair, I don't think we treat them any differently. Nobody says to me, is that an academy or is it a maintained school, where safeguarding is concerned. Where there are other issues, then there is that discussion. Initially, the direct conversation is, again, with the designated safeguarding lead, and also the head teacher of that school. So if we're aware of some safeguarding concerns in a single school, then our direct conversation is initially with that person who is responsible for the leadership in that school. And we will have that conversation. So Charles Daniels, our school improvement officer, who line manages our education safeguarding leads, will talk to head teachers. And head teachers, and I have to say this, are very receptive to the work of our safeguarding leads, because, again, they see safeguarding as their key priority for the youngsters. So that's where it would start. If we don't get any traction, and if we don't get any movement, that's where it does differ. So if it's a maintained school, then it would be a conversation with the governing body and a discussion with the chair of governors. With an academy, it would be then having that conversation with either the chief executive officer, or if they've got a kind of a central person responsible for safeguarding, then it would be that person. Again, we do have escalation, and if we don't get the responses that we require, then we've also got the regional director and the regional schools commissioner and the education skills funding agency, where we can have those conversations, that we've got serious concerns, if we have serious concerns around safeguarding. And similarly, I have to say that we can kind of refer things through to Ofsted as well. What I would say is that where there are concerns, we do want it being dealt with very quickly, and to some extent, and this is where we do respond to complaints that have been raised with Ofsted. So somebody's made a complaint to Ofsted around a safeguarding concern. Ofsted will come to the local authority because it's our statutory responsibility. We will contact the school, and the head teacher or the person in the school on some occasions says, well, actually, unless you give me more detail, we do not know what this concern is. So my point around, initially, you know, a parent needs to be raising it with the class teacher, the form tutor, the head of year, to try and nip things initially, to try and resolve them. Because actually, if we leave them too long, then it becomes more difficult to kind of respond to those problems. But coming back to the question around, are there routes that we can tackle and we can deal with, then absolutely there are, and we do. And just one more point. That links back to the independent sector as well. So if we've got concerns around safeguarding in one of the independent schools, then exactly the same process.
Thank you for that. Just, and again, just for clarity, how do we then satisfy ourselves as a committee that has a responsibility to scrutinise, and particularly something like this, which is a serious issue? Is it possible for us to get a blanket view of what the issues are here in Staffordshire? Or from what I'm hearing is that we can do that with the schools that we have influence and control over, but where's the picture with the general? I accept if a parent has a problem, that local approach to a teacher and then move it on, but how do we get a strategic view of where we are with this particular issue? One of the reasons I ask that is that when the terms of reference were written for this review, I think it was the first objective was to understand the level of the problem and issue here in Staffordshire. And I think that was a reasonable thing for the review to try to do. And this isn't a criticism of the report, but it recognised that it wasn't able to make that judgment. Ofsted then said that we had to just assume it was there, and I think that's a reasonable assumption, and we had to put things in place. But is there not a need at some stage, if we're going to be effective and efficient about how we tackle these issues, that we have a granular understanding of what the problem is, and not just a blanket acceptance that it exists, so we'll have those things. And when we hit those hurdles of the influence that we can have over certain types of school, where's the big strategic view of how we're tackling the issue?
Okay, so just picking up on that, the strategic view comes back to the Children's Safeguarding Board. You know, so from there, one of the things they ask every year is for every education provider within Staffordshire to provide a response to the safeguarding audit. So one of the things, and I think again Jonathan referenced the that within his kind of introduction. So as a response to the work of this group, that within our safeguarding audit in 23-24, that there is a section, I think it's section 8. Section 8 is specifically linked to going back to the kind of the peer-on-peer abuse, and about how do they know, how do they assure themselves that they're doing everything they can from a school perspective. We have to gather that information at a school level. I wouldn't want anybody to be under the illusion that if we wanted to go and get that information from maintained schools, it would be any more straightforward than it would be for academies. It isn't. It's about that individual institution providing that information back through those audits, and it's through the audits that we get the overall picture around what's happening from a safeguarding perspective in our Staffordshire's education provision. What I would also say is that actually, our greater concerns, and if Charles was sitting next to me now, he'd be saying our greater concerns is where we receive a safeguarding audit that says green, 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 green. You know, everything is green and there's a 100% response rate to everything. Those kinds of responses trigger as much concern around, to some extent, where there are schools who haven't done things and are not putting into place some of those processes, because that's that bit around, we all recognise, and anybody that says things do not take place in schools are, you know, deluding themselves, because it will be happening. It's about how we deal with it and how we work with our youngsters to make sure that they have a voice. And I can't remember again, I think it was Johnny made that point about making sure that they have a voice to share their concerns and they are then dealt with appropriately. So from a strategic perspective, then it's the safeguarding board response that they will get the outcome from the safeguarding audits, and there was one done last year around the response to the audits. Audits are annually undertaken by all of our schools.
I know people have to go, so thank you for that. I think that really does provide some clarity, and I think it's hugely encouraging to hear that we have such a sophisticated process of being able to do that. I am going to wrap it up in a second because I understand people have to go. I think, Reverend Metcalfe, you wanted to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. Could I just say, on behalf of the Spotlight Review councillors, thank you for all the work that is being done to address this issue, both by councillors, by officers and by voluntary agencies and other people. When the Spotlight Review was brought about, they were dealing with a new issue that people had not been thoroughly aware of before. It's really an uncomfortable issue, that of child on child, peer on peer sexual abuse. And it really came into the sort of front headlights only about 2 years ago. So I think the Spotlight Review was concerned, first of all, to make sure that everybody within Staffordshire was aware of this, because Staffordshire schools had been cited within the response to Me Too and everybody's welcome and so on. First of all, that there was awareness of it. Secondly, that there was liaison and coordination between the different agencies about this. And thirdly, that a good practice was being embedded in relation to peer-on-peer sexual harassment. And on the whole, the Spotlight Review group were very convinced that Staffordshire agencies and people were on the ball here. And we're very grateful for the work that's been carried on since then, and with the response to the action plan. First, we think that much of the abuse that happens is hidden. It's very difficult to quantify. It's very difficult to get direct evidence. And hearing the voices of young people, it's not difficult, it's not easy, within the formalities of a school safeguarding structure. And this is one of the problems, and moreover it spills over into the outside world because online access from pupils isn't only what happens in school, it's what happens between pupil and pupil outside school as well, and that's almost impossible to monitor from within the school setup. So you turn to the issues around protecting children from what's going on online, and that again is difficult. We commented about the online safety bill needing to be made fit for purpose, and we're aware that the government has had great difficulty in dealing with different agendas in relation to the online safety bill, and it's still not come through in a fully satisfactory form. I think we're going to have to work on this, and safeguarding agencies and responsible persons up and down the country to continue investigating how to protect children in the broadest sense from being vulnerable to what is happening to them online, not just peer on peer, but in other ways as well. And that's an enormous question which the Spotlight Review couldn't deal with, but it could simply flag up. And that's going to be an online concern, as the councillor has said. And we do want our children to be safe, we want them to be safe in school, and we do what we can about that, but then there's the outside world as well, which impinges on school. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who's engaging with this, Councillor. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I think given time, I'll just come to you in a second. We have agreed that I think we probably need a little bit more work and maybe consideration around some of these issues. And if members are happy that we are going to meet and discuss this in a little bit more detail, then perhaps we can pick up some of these issues around hearing the voices of young people and online abuse. Are there any other questions before we finish? Councillor McMahon.
I'm going to sound like a real old fogey. And I don't want to appear remotely judgmental about the younger generation, because I'm not at all. The word resilience comes to mind, but resilience is a very harsh word. So I'm going to use the word confidence. The PHSE is all about picking up negative things, is my understanding of it. Is their health okay? What are the economic circumstances? And confidence needs to be built in a child in a safe environment. And there's something about monitoring confidence and making sure that they have the appropriate confidence for their age that makes them less likely to be subject to safeguarding issues later on. And I wonder if there's a place for that. Now, I don't want to make this thing so big it becomes like a juggernaut and you can't do anything. But it strikes me that there's a child who's not confident is far more likely to get themselves into difficulties, far more likely not be able to speak about it because they don't have the confidence to do so, than a child who is confident. And we know, at least that's the impression, and I think it's a pretty reasonable one, that confidence and resilience in children is waning because of all the issues that we've discussed. And it's a question of what's the canary in the mine. And it strikes me that whatever you want to call it, I think confidence is most probably a kinder word than resilience, is worth looking at and is important. That's it.
Thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right. I recently read only a couple of days ago the most recent review of the Prevent strategy that talks about not doing enough to address non-violent aspects, and it talks very much around potential sexual and criminal abuse of young people. So I do think that there is a discussion to be had about how we move forward with some of those. I'll give Tim the final word on it. Thank you.
So just picking up on the kind of that positive aspect, one of the aspects we haven't talked about is either RSE, which is relationships and sex education, or RHSE, which is the health aspect of that. And from an early age, we talk about positive relationships. So it does pick up on that kind of those positive aspects and what does positive relationships look like and what does that feel like to give the youngsters the confidence. I want to finish on a positive, although some people might say, well, actually, it's a slightly negative. But I was talking to somebody responsible for governance around a report that their head teacher had shared with them at school, and it had highlighted a number of incidents that had taken place, and it was the local academy council were having the discussion about, actually we're concerned about the number of these referrals that have been made around online, alleged bullying online. And actually the school said, we're reporting it because all of those, and it comes back to Mike's point, all of these took place outside of school, not related to what was happening in school, but actually as a school they saw it as their responsibility to work with their youngsters to say that irrespective of which part of society it is, this is how we behave. And so just because it's not in school, the behaviour isn't acceptable outside school either. So I see, that real positive way in which that school is addressing those issues, reporting it to their governors around things that are taking place beyond the school day. So that, I think, is really positive that schools see that as their business as well.
I think that is a real step forward, and I think a positive note to finish this on. Can I just say thank you for the members to come along, also Tim and Reverend Metcalfe. Thank you very much. It certainly generated a lot of discussion, and we look forward to moving it forward. Thank you very much for coming. Just give a couple of seconds while people want to leave. Item 5 then, Children's Transformation Project, a progress briefing. Thank you. Thank you very much. I wonder if we could just start with people to introduce themselves so we know who they are. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Natasha Moody, Assistant Director for Wellbeing and Partnerships. Morning everyone, I'm Nisha Gupta, Assistant Director for Children's Social Care.
Good morning, I'm Tracy Thorley, AD for Corporate Operations, of which the Business Support and Contact Centre sits under my structure.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
Although I wasn't specifically on the agenda for this, as I've come to the other item, and this is obviously all with, well, most of it's within my portfolio, I thought I'd stay and maybe able to add some value or pick up on points. But before I start, I just wanted to say something very, very briefly about the last item and the comments made by Councillor Mohan about confidence or resilience. And I think what we do have to remember is a lot of that is built up from a very, very early age through early years as well. And it is not just a responsibility for schools, and particularly secondary schools. A lot of that is built up a long time before. And I wouldn't begin to suggest I'm any sort of expert, because an expert on that is sitting next to me on my left. So and I'm sure Natasha will take on board things that have been said in that when we start to deliver our early years strategy along with Nisha going forward.
Councillor McMahon, sorry.
I welcome Tim's response to what I said, but it wasn't really where I was going. It's not a question of what we do to improve confidence or resilience. It's a measure of whether the child is confident or resilient. Because you're right, it starts very young, but that measure will inform us as to the risk, and then what can be done in order to improve that confidence so they're at less risk of safeguarding issues in the future. That's where I was coming from. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't want to progress the argument and waste time, but I do have some issue with resilience. We tend to suggest that we want to make kids tough so that they can withstand things. That's sort of what resilience means to me. I do think there's an argument about sort of building social capital, and surely that's what we're about, isn't it? Is having the ability to build a process that supports individuals. Yes, we want them to be confident and have resilience, but we also want to have, that isn't the outcome, is it? The outcome is, do we have that sort of social capital that puts a metaphoric arm around people to support them through it, which is, I'm hoping, what this perhaps is.
That was a nice slinky link into the work we are trying to do, and I think you're right, there's no kind of golden bullet for some of this stuff, is there? And I think there's a mixture of things that we can and should be doing, and it's certainly the principles of which the children's transformation were built on. So it was about creating that resilience. We did call it resilience at the time, actually, Councillor Spence, but I think you're right, it's that ability to bounce back, isn't it? Because at any given day, I think any of us can feel a range of confident to not confident, and actually it's that ability, isn't it, to keep on coming back from that and learn and develop. So it's definitely something that was at the forefront of our thinking, I suppose, in terms of that transformation. So I think most of you were here last time we came. We've been asked to come back today to provide an update following the 6-month review that we brought back for the committee to consider 6 months ago. Can't believe it's actually been that long. So this is an update on where we've got to since we last came. So we're going to just recap on what we told you last time. I won't spend too much time on that if that's okay with people. Then take you through what we've actually done and what our next steps are. And again, Nisha and Tracy are here so that actually if there's any specific questions related to their areas of the world, then they can answer those for you at the end if that's okay. So if you'll remember, we, as part of the 6-month review, we used 2 pieces of information. One was around this, what is called the NPS, Net Promoter Score, basically, which is basically employees' feedback on how they think it is to work in our teams. The other one we used was actually something really specific where we asked the teams, actually, what is it like to work in Staffordshire County Council in the Children and Families Department after doing the 6-month review? And actually, what could we be doing better as a result of doing that review 6 months into it? And these were the themes that came back from those staff. So there was lots of feedback around kind of the workforce development, the training and skills that those staff had. There was lots of feedback in terms of some of the systems and processes still feeling a little bit clunky and not necessarily delivering the aspirations of the transformation as well as they could do. And so they asked us to really try and address some of those issues. And so what we've been doing for the last 6 months is trying to make sure that we're structured in a way and starting to move some of those pieces of work forward. Again, that's just a summary really of the things that were going well and the things that could be better. And this is the structure that we put in place. Now, this has changed slightly since we last came to see you, so we'll just explain what's changed. So last time we came to see you, we said that we would make sure that there was oversight from Neelam, the Director of Children's Services, and we would structure that in a way that you would have 3 boards basically that sat underneath that. So you'd have the one around workforce, which Nisha chairs, you'd have the one around embedding the system, which I'm chairing, and then there was one around communications and engagement. And actually, having had a lot of discussion, we've agreed that communication and engagement is something that kind of sits alongside all of those project boards. So we're really fortunate that we've got a comms officer that works alongside us to do that comms and engagement work across all of those strands of work. We've also kind of incorporated into that governance structure 2 priority pieces of work. So when we heard from staff about what was working particularly well or what could be better, the 2 areas that had been identified time and time again in terms of being better were around send improvement, because we'd got the APP from the Department for Education, so they'd asked us to do an accelerated progress plan, and as part of that they wanted that to be somewhere within this governance structure so that it wasn't lost as part of that transformation work we were doing. So we've made sure that that's built into the governance structure. And also, most of you will know that actually there's been a huge pressure really in terms of the number of children coming into care, and so quite rightly there was an ask from Neelam for us to include something around that cohort of children to make sure that the outcomes were as positive as they could be. So again, that's something that's changed, which hopefully is a good way forward really in terms of making sure that we've got oversight on those 2 critical cohorts of children that need our help and support most. So I'm just going to talk through the kind of 3 areas that we identified in terms of programmes of work, tell you what we've done so far, and also kind of cover off what might be the key next steps that we've got already planned. And then again, like I said, we'll give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So the workforce programme is the one that's chaired by Nisha. Some of you may know that there's been cabinet investment in terms of our workforce. So Nisha took a paper to cabinet earlier on this, later on last year, to ask for some additional investment for some of the areas where we identified that there was pressures in the system. So when we'd done the modelling around the transformation, the numbers hadn't stayed stagnant, and so that investment was to help us to address some of those changes in terms of that data that we'd seen following COVID. So that's been a fairly major piece of work that Nisha and the team have been working on. As a result of that, that investment, we have had some new jobs that have come into the structure, and so again, we've worked with people services to make sure that the job descriptions are in place. And we've also been doing a lot of work cooperatively with our staff in terms of understanding, well, what does staff wellbeing look like for you? How do we get this right? How can we engage you in the right kind of conversations to make sure that we do some stuff around wellbeing? And we've worked very closely with people services who are doing a lot of that work corporately, so that we can link into that. We've continued to place a great and a strong emphasis on restorative practice. Somebody in our team, Selena Del Corso, is doing a piece of work around restorative practice offer and what that might mean across the service, so that we can really start to promote that as a way of working. And we've seen some excellent examples, particularly in some of the schools, for example, where the schools have really embraced this restorative practice, and Carl Hobson's been doing a piece of work up in Newcastle, which has been really, really positively received about how schools can work more restoratively with children. So that's definitely something that's gathered a lot of pace. We've conducted a skills audit to try and identify what those training needs, because if you remember rightly, last time we said people felt like there was a lot of training, but the training wasn't tailored to the gaps in terms of their particular, knowledge and skills gaps. So that's something that's been addressed. And we've also been working with people services to make sure that reporting requirements are in place. So we've got the right management information coming through the system so that we can see at a click of a button what the gaps and areas for improvement might be across that system. And that sounds really simple, but actually has been quite a big ask, really. And then we've also been working with HR and finance systems so that we can extract information, again, at a click of a button, that allows us to see the population of the structure, because those 2 systems were very separate. So again, at the moment, we're just in the final stages of making sure that we've got a report that you can see, which has got your live structure with the finance attached to it, which is massive progress from a kind of manager's perspective. And then on the next slide, we've just talked through the next step. So we are still working on staff wellbeing. That's not something we've cracked. I don't think it ever will be. I think we'll continue to need to do that work with staff. So we are working to make sure that we continue to deliver that, both through one-to-one management support, but also in terms of more formal training and opportunities that might be available for workers across the system. We've been looking at the system and the data that we carry to try and understand workforce pressures. So, as I said, when we did the workforce transformation, one of the big things we looked at was the data. So where did we have the children coming in from our system? Rather than splitting the resources equally across 8 different districts, we were trying to make sure that the workforce was structured in a way that it met those pressures that might be seen locally. And that's something we continue to keep an eye on because it's ever changing. We've continued, like I said, we've done the skills audit. The next part of that is making sure that the training plan is in place to give people the right skills in the right time. And again, that's something we'll probably go back to look at 12, 18 months down the line to see if that's made an impact, because I think it's important that we continue to maintain that focus. We are making sure that we're doing some work as part of that workforce development in terms of making sure that people are aware of restorative practice. We've seen a lot of new people coming into the system. Some of those people would have had restorative training practice before, but some of them not. So we're making sure that that's rolled out again so that staff have access to that, because that's a really critical part of us being able to deliver the transformation that we need. Very much getting families working with us and not us doing for families or telling them what we think they should be doing. And then also we've been doing a lot of work around how do we keep and train talent. For those of you that don't know, social workers are like gold dust. They're really hard to get hold of, and keeping and retaining them is really important. So I know there's a lot of work that's going on to make sure that we're growing our own, but also that we are keeping and attracting people. So again, Nisha's been doing some work on progression pathways for staff so that we can make sure that we have got that in place. Again, children in care. So this was a key cohort that Neelam had identified, I suppose, as part of those early discussions. A key cohort for a couple of reasons. One, because we know that they're more vulnerable, and two, because the cost pressures that we were seeing in this part of the world were significant. And we know that from the care review that was done nationally, there was a lot of information contained within that around the market pressures that we were seeing. So for those of you that don't know, there was a huge piece of work done around the care review, and that identified really that you've got a large number of quite large providers who were dominating the market, and really it become a place where they could kind of name the price really in terms of care for children and not necessarily providing the right type of care that we'd want. So again, that's an area of focus for us. Part of that programme's looked at a cohort analysis. So what do we know about the children that are coming into our care? What do we see in terms of their complexity? Are there things that we could be doing earlier to prevent them coming into care? How are we making sure that we've got that focus on getting them back home once they do come in? One of the other things we've done is around the adult specialist worker model. So you'll remember that part of the transformation was looking at this adult specialist model. So this is something that a lot of local authorities had done. And it was basically having a team of practitioners that were specialists in other areas. So, for example, substance misuse, mental health, domestic abuse, and those practitioners working with and alongside our social workers. So we've been making sure that that model is up and running. We've identified champions in each of the districts to make sure that that model, they know how to work that model, and they are actively promoting it within the districts to see if we can make it the impact that we thought it might have. We are doing some work on new emergency placements. So a policy and procedure has been drafted, circulated for practitioner feedback to try and make sure that when children do come in an emergency, we've got the right kind of support in place for them. And we have been doing some work around the adoption processes to make sure that they are mapped and understood and implemented effectively. We've got a draft version of the sufficiency strategy, which is going to Children and Families SMT next month. And that really is our plan around how we're going to disrupt the market. So how are we going to be really clear with the market about what we need for our children, what are the types of provision that we think we need, and the relationship that we want to have with our providers moving forward, so that actually when children do come into our care as a last resort, they've got the quality of care that they deserve when they get there. In terms of next steps then, so obviously we'll have to, now we've got the emergency placements policy, we'll do some workshops with staff to make sure that they know, understand that, and that they're embedding it. We have a quality assurance framework, and again, that will be implemented by April 2023. And again, we're looking at whether or not that's being implemented effectively, continuing to kind of keep the eye on the ball in terms of that. We're doing some work around workshops in terms of making sure that there's that reunification support so that actually we do get children home. We're also doing some work on monitoring processes. So actually once children come into our care, how do we maintain that focus to get them back home? And again, we'll launch the sufficiency strategy and make sure that that implementation plan is embedded. So there's a lot of actions that will fall out of that strategy. And we've just established the governance board for that moving forward again to make sure it's got the oversight and is implemented as we need it to be. Now this one's, I think this one's an interesting one. So this one's we've called embedding the programme. So this started off being called Ways of Working, and we've decided to change the name to Embedding the Ways of Working. This one's had a bit of a stop-starter in terms of getting moving, and the reason for that is because I think at the beginning when staff gave us the feedback, we thought this would be relatively easy. They'd identified that they wanted the right business support, they wanted the right panels to support them, they wanted to make sure that people coming through the front door got to the right place. And so we thought, well, actually, they seem like really, really easy chunks of stuff we can do. What we quickly discovered, actually, is that they're all interdependent with one another, and actually it was needed, the process that we needed to take was more an end-to-end review. So actually, how do we take a cohort of children, work them through that system, understand what the business support needs are for that, understand that they're getting the right response when they come to the front door, and that the panels that are in place support them to do that. So it's felt very stop-start, but actually I think the output will be better as a result of having had that conversation and dialogue, really. But the work we've achieved so far is that we have got a formal agreement in place with the business support. We have made sure that people have attended the panels, that they've got a good awareness of those panels before we start to disrupt them or change them. We've mapped out the panels, and we've got a document that's been circulated with staff so that everybody's clear on what panels have we got in place and what are the purpose of those panels, who chairs them and how do you get to them. We have been doing some work around the MASH transition, and one of the things that I think we still need to do, but again as part of that end-to-end review, is make sure that actually we're having those conversations early enough with the contact centre so that they get the right support they need in the right place. And again, that comes back to the presentation that Tim was talking about earlier in terms of, you know, the last thing we want is schools kind of referring into the local authority when actually there is action and activity that they could be undertaking themselves. So I think there's more work we need to do to make sure that the front door are upskilled in terms of being able to identify, well, what would we expect others to be able to do first before they got to us. And then we're currently doing some pilots or have done some pilots around different kind of process parts like approvals, so that actually we can try and be as efficient as possible, because I think one of the things that we've identified is that the business support that was in place was fairly old-fashioned and a bit clunky and not as efficient and as effective as it needed to be. So I think one of the benefits of it moving into Tracy's team is that actually, because they manage the business support on behalf of the whole organisation, they're used to working in this way, they've been able to identify some efficiencies where we could be doing things better. And again, in the future, we will make sure that that is tied in with that end-to-end process. So the activity we've got planned is we're going to take each cohort of children. We're doing some work at the moment to identify which is the right cohort to start with in terms of the most pressing. We think that that might be children with disabilities as a start, but we're continuing to just monitor that over we've got a piece of work next week to just do to make sure that we pick that cohort first. We're going to do some work around getting to know the system, who are the people in the system now that we've had all of these changes. So we're going to do some short videos with district and central functions so that people understand who's in the structure, how do I get to know them. I think one of the things we'd underestimated was the scale, you know, the number of people involved and actually the scale of change that might have happened, and actually people needing to reorientate themselves now with who's working in that system. We're doing this end-to-end process, like I said, and making sure the business support is wrapped around it, and that'll be the main focus of our work. That will be all-encompassing in terms of linking with the front door, the business support and the panels work, so it'll tie it all up together, really. And a really practical example we've got in terms of SEND, I suppose, in terms of how you can measure our effectiveness moving forward, is that actually we know that the processes that are in place for SEND are still the same as they were pre-transformation. Yet a lot of the principles around the transformation were whole family working, closer decision making to the ground, and one of the things that the district operating leads are picking up is that actually that process now needs to change as a result of that. So again, that'll be interesting to kind of report back to you next time on, I think. So I'm hoping that you're all aware that we've got an accelerated progress plan in place. So the SEND programme is the final thing that Neelam said, you know what, I want oversight of this. I want to know and understand how that programme of work is supported by the transformation. So there's a separate improvement plan that's in place for the APP. They've been doing a lot of work. A lot of that is directed by DFE timescales and reports back to them fairly regularly. We'll be coming up for 12 months this summer. So again, a lot of that work has been taking place at pace. At times, because of the timescales that we've needed to work to report back to the Department for Education and our improvement partner, this has had to take priority over some other areas of work. So I think it has been something that we've all had to prioritise at times. But it does mean that the focus of attention has gone here, and that actually the SEND programme is fairly well embedded and on track. The Department for Education have been really pleased with our progress, and at the last 6-month review kind of said to us that actually they were really impressed and have been sharing the way we're doing this with other authorities who've got a local, who've had an inadequate inspection. So that's fairly positive, I think. Next steps for the APP are to make sure that we continue to do the co-production work. So we're doing a piece of work at the moment which is being led by Skivvies again. They are doing a piece of work to try and develop a co-production charter, for want of a better word. I'm not sure it'll be called that in the end, but it's basically a definition of what is co-production and how do we make sure that it's something that we're doing with people all of the time. Because again, that was one of the principles of the transformation, was working with our families and making them part of the solution and not kind of going to them with something that's predetermined. So that's a big piece of work that will be delivered over the next 6 months. We're doing a piece of work around special school strategy. So at the moment we've got a number of different specialist provisions in place, and we're doing some work around that. And then obviously we'll do the SEND 2 return, and we'll also have the annual visit. There's also a plan in place to do some work around the discretionary SEND transport, which is going through to Cabinet again this summer. So before we conclude and pass over to you for questions, we just thought it might be pertinent here really to just share with you some of the risks that we see. So our capacity to deliver this change and embed it all at a time when actually the numbers of children coming in had gone up has been a real challenge. So at times it's felt like you're pulling on a very small cohort of people to be able to do some of this work at pace. And so one of the things we felt for the first 6 months is that actually that's been a real challenge. I think the investment has addressed that, and as new people come into the system it will obviously help, but I think it is still a key risk. We also think that the scope and the scale of the cultural change has maybe at times not been kind of that well articulated. So to achieve what it is we're trying to achieve is no mean feat. There's no other local authority in the country that have managed to achieve this level of integration in children's services. And so actually trying to get people to know and understand different parts of the world and respect those cultural differences that might be in place. So you might have, for example, a social worker who's been very used to dealing with a very small caseload of 15 to 20 children if they're lucky, actually then becoming responsible for a team of key workers who'll be responsible for 200 children with a SEND plan is really different for them to get their heads around. The way of working, the difference in terms of expectations is really different. So actually that's something we've had to have a lot of conversations around in terms of making sure that they know and understand and are respectful of each other. But also I think there's still work for us to do in terms of making sure that we land that cultural change, in terms of making sure that the staff are supportive but equally challenging, that performance and learning is at the heart of what we do, and that we work in a way that is restorative and polite to one another, because actually when there is real risk around children, there's a real danger that you want to get everything done immediately to safeguard and protect that child, and that means you're under pressure, and therefore your natural response sometimes is to get a bit shirty, isn't it? So actually that's been really challenging in terms of managing that expectation. And the other one is around future inspection. So as we've just said, the DFE being in and doing that work around the accelerated progress plan has meant that at times that's had to take priority. We are due an ILACS inspection in children's services. If they give us the phone call on Monday, that will absolutely divert our attention away from this programme of work, because we'll have to respond to an immediate inspection. And we know that will happen before we're next sat in front of you. So I suppose it's just a note of caution, I suppose, in terms of being patient with us in terms of what we might achieve over the next 6 months. And if we aren't on track, being, I suppose, cognizant of the fact we may well have been through an inspection that could last up to 2 weeks. So that's the main risks. So over to you for any questions.
Natasha, thank you for that. That was quite a lot to take in. Are there any questions? Yeah. Councillor Snape.
The first one is a comment. 15-page report in 12 minutes. It's too much to take in, Natasha, I'm sorry. That sort of report we need to be given at least 48 hours before so we can go through it and come back to you. I'm sorry, great report, but as a councillor sat here, I suppose I took in 20% of it. It was, you speak very fast to start with, so it really is difficult to make notes without missing the next 3 points. That's what I'm saying. So if in future, I mean, I'll go through the chair, is it possible to have that type of report given to us at least 48 hours beforehand?
I think, to be fair, I did have it. I think you sent it through. And so it was my, it's my fault that it didn't go out. So
my apologies to you then, Natasha.
Yeah.
No. No. No.
I'll consider myself chastised.
Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else?
Can I just...
Yeah, please do.
I mean, I've just come back on the committee after 3 years off it. Perhaps it might have been 4 years. It was when transformation was just starting to go through, if you remember. So really, I've not seen any numbers. So when I came off the committee, it was about 1,370 who were in full-time care. How many what is our number now, really? If you could come back to me. Or just the, I mean, I know it changes almost on an hourly basis, so just come back to me on that, really. And another question really is just, then answer both to everyone. When I came off the committee, the adoption process was very, very slow. So we weren't losing people. We were having people coming on, but because of the judge who was sitting at the time, everything went very, very slowly. Has all that process now quickened up? Because I was reading an online report last night, nationally, the process is very, very slow still. Have we had any improvement in Staffordshire?
I'm going to move to you.
Thank you. So in terms of number of children in care, so the number as of today stands at 1384. However, it has gone up, but if we, there is a bit of a nuance to it, that we have had a surge of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children since September of last year. So if we exclude the US children, then the numbers have gone down to 1284. And this cohort analysis that Natasha talked about focuses exactly on that in terms of bringing help at the right opportunity, at the earliest opportunity, and reunification of those youngsters who are ready to be reunited with their families or extended families back in the community, to focus on that, put some energy behind it, and exit children from care when it is safe to do so. So that was about children in care. In terms of your other question around adoption, our timeliness, Staffordshire timeliness for when we receive the placement order, when the child is freed for adoption, to when the child is placed with an adopter, is well below the national and statistical neighbours. So we are doing really well placing children with their prospective adopters. There is, however, a delay in terms of reaching the adoption order when they exit care. And we are working on that. Again, the Children in Care program is working with the judiciary, with our staff and our workforce, and with CAFCAS to make sure that it's not about the timetabling, because our LFJB has been focused very much on turning the tide on our court disposals at this point in time for care proceedings. And we have turned a corner in that. I think we are doing pretty well. Nationally, that's what the figures are telling us, that we have managed to bring ourselves in line with the national statistics, but that has been at an expense of getting adoption and SGOs and things like that prioritized in court. But it is very much a live matter, and we are working through it.
Thank you. Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you. Natasha, in order to deliver all that you've said on the screen this morning, it is very much reliant on the health and well-being of the people that work for us and our staff. And I just wondered, when you talked about the help and support you give to them, what form that takes. And then secondly, do we look externally to bring other experts in around health and well-being, or do we tend to do it all sort of in-house ourselves?
So the support we provide will vary from person to person, and it will be very much based on the employee's needs, I would suggest. I mean, I can think, I've got lots of different people in my team, and all of them will require something slightly different, and so I think as a line manager, it's your kind of, it's your responsibility to make sure you're working with that person to really understand what that might look like for them. So it could be a range of different things that we're putting in place. I suppose more officially or more formally, a lot of the support that we get is from people services. So they're doing a lot of work at the moment around wellbeing. We've got a real focus on it in the organisation. I mean, if you walk through SP1 at the minute, you can see loads of stuff on screens around, you know, the recipe for happiness and all kinds of stuff like that. So they usually provide that through a range of trainers, both internal trainers and external, from what I understand. But a lot of our staff will all access that support. So a lot of them are mental health champions. Again, there'll be people that will be contactable across the organisation. And from what I understand, we've got a fairly good number of people who take on that role. So it really will vary across the teams, really.
Often you will find that people who are perhaps suffering from ill health or mental illness or whatever aren't always the first to come forward and admit they've got a problem. And therefore, in the organisation I used to work for before I finished, we used to do lots of sort of group sessions that would sort of be in place by particularly external experts who would come in and take a group of staff to one side and spend time with them, rather than us waiting for them actually to approach us and say, yeah, I've got a problem, when often it's a bit late. And I just wondered whether there was any sort of policies or any sort of training platform or plan that's in place that does that on an ongoing basis, that actually delivers that for the staff without them actually having to come and ask for that support.
So, yeah, so we've got, so within business support, but across corporately, they do have, I can't think what it's called now, the staff voice. So they have groups that come together for different pieces of work. Some of it is around that well-being. So as Natasha said, we've got external subject matter experts, let's just say, who we can draft in, who do sessions with people. So as an example, within my area, we brought somebody in around, I know we don't like the word resilience, but that resilience of staff as they were going through the change, because they couldn't articulate why they were feeling the way that they were feeling, and sometimes they need somebody external to the organisation to help them to understand what they're feeling. Then we can put, as Natasha said, the actions in place as a manager to be able to support them. So I think as an organisation, when we've done the survey out to staff, they really do feel supported on the wellbeing side. That's not just children's, that's across all the areas.
Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, I did want to just come back, if I may, Mr Chairman, to the question that Paul asked about adoption. And I don't know whether, I think we have been here, but probably in the last 3 years when you've not been on the committee, Paul, that we now have a regional adoption agency in effect, which is children together. I wrote it down as well. Together for children, where ourselves together with Stoke, Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin work together. We've still got our own individual bits of that, but what that helps to do, it gives us a better pool of people who might be looking to adopt children.
Natasha? Sorry.
Just to come back as well on the wellbeing point, just to mention there's a couple of things that we do corporately. So we have a conversation called We Talk. So every member of staff has a We Talk conversation, which is held usually monthly. As part of that, it does give you the opportunity to have those conversations around whether or not they're feeling, you know, emotionally well or not. And I would also say that where we have got those mental health champions, they can be a real advocate for change. So I've got a mental health champion in my team who is absolutely amazing, and she will quite often email the team and say, I want you to know that it's okay not to be okay, and I'm just letting you know I'm taking today off because I need time for me to be able to digest some of the stuff I'm going through. And actually having people like that within the organisation does make it really easy for other people then to be able to feel comfortable enough to be able to have the conversation and talk about stuff like that. So again, there are lots of things that we're doing to support people.
Councillor Snape.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton, that regional process was just starting really when I came off the committee. And I've no complaints about the way we deal with adoptions. It was more that the legal side was slowing everything down that we were trying to put forward, really. It was very difficult. Just what percentage of our staff are actually still working from home, if that's possible?
We've just actually seen the impact of this week. So as part of the recent staff survey they did, they asked people how often they were coming into the office. We had the results of that for children and families this week. It does vary from team to team. On average, most people are in the office 2 days a week. But actually, and that seems to be their preferred approach, they seem to want that hybrid and the balance between working from home and being in the office. Obviously, the range of roles that we undertake as children's services are so varied that that can be really different. So you could have some staff. So I know I've got some of the team who are in 5 days a week. So where there is a business need, they are back in the office all the time. But for those who haven't got a business need to be in, it's fairly flexible. And at the moment, it seems to be 2 to 3 days a week are the preferred.
Councillor Snipe.
And is that being managed? Because, as we know from any organisation, there are certain people who need more management supervision who perhaps could use working from home as a way of not doing what they're meant to be. So is that sort of being managed by our senior staff?
Yeah, I think as we get more confident with knowing and understanding it, we get more confident at managing those who are working from home. So, you know, it's been a huge change, hasn't it, for us both individually and as an organisation. And actually, I think we're all still learning, it'd be fair to say. I don't think any of us could say we've got this completely nailed. But I think, yeah, we are absolutely having those right kind of conversations. And again, that's where that we talk conversation comes in, because as part of those conversations, you're talking to your team about what are we going to accomplish over the next month and actually making that agreement with them so that actually you can hold them accountable for the things that they are and aren't doing.
Thank you. Councillor Sutton.
I think Councillor Snape's picked up on a really good point, and I think as a general sort of comment, getting more of our staff, and this is not just this organisation, but I think across the board, getting back to be more within the office environment, I think is really important. But I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that because a member of our staff who works in children's services doesn't come into the office, doesn't mean to say they're not out there visiting people, might be using that day, their home as the base, because what they're doing is all nearby, relatively nearby where they live. And through the whole of COVID, you know, social workers, family supporters, whoever, were doing these visits all the time, although they weren't necessarily always coming into the office. So I think Natasha's right. You know, it's very much a business need, but I certainly want to see the push towards more what you're suggesting, Paul.
Councillor McMahon.
In my head, if there was a way to sum up what your change is, it's a multidisciplinary local approach. And there's always been a worry for me that working from home is going to make silo situations worse, for obvious reasons. And therefore, I just think it's. I think I'm really glad Paul's brought it up, because I think that's something you've got to keep a real eye on, given the fact what you're trying to do. There's a tension possibly between what you're trying to do and and the working patterns that people have. So the question for me is not so much how often are they in, but how often are they in and actually see each other in the flesh. And how often are they in and see each other from different departments and different parts of the whole in the flesh? Because that's what's going to hold the whole thing together. Okay.
It's an interesting question, and it's certainly something that we have thought about and planned for. So when staff are in, we have made it not mandatory, but it's an unwritten rule that all management meetings, the team meetings, will be face-to-face. So managers, there will be exceptions when somebody can't make to those face-to-face meetings in an office where team comes together, they talk about their performance, the learning from quality assurance, because how we are triangulating that people are doing what they need to do whilst they are working from home is through performance culture, is through quality assurance, and that tells the manager whether somebody with a caseload of 24 is doing what they need to do out there in the community and protecting that child, yes or no, and they know that. So they're using, we have made it, build that culture of performance and QA. Team meetings are face-to-face, and we are inviting people from multiple disciplines. We've had two staff conferences, one in Q3 and one in Q4, which brings people together for that networking, gives them an opportunity to find out who is who, what they do, if somebody is new. It's planned in their induction that they get to meet with people, relevant people that they need to deliver their jobs adequately. So, and induction is something, again, that we are working to improve, because we realize that this is the future way of working. So we've got to embrace and make it work for us. We've also introduced our practitioner forums. We did that in Q1 of 2022. And it's a well-embedded process now within children and families. The practitioner forums is for all practitioners across children and families, and it's quite well attended. And then we have a managers forum where managers can come together, share the learning, share the news, what's happening in this, within children and families and within the local authority, and also share good practice with each other, any challenges. Really practice and discuss things restoratively in those forums. So I think we are creating those opportunities where people are able to connect and learn from each other, share their experiences and grow together. So any new ideas are welcome, but I think we've got that, and we are constantly thinking of those creative avenues to make sure that people don't feel isolated, that they have opportunities to share if they have any concerns and learn and progress.
Thank you for that. Tracy, I think.
So, obviously, Nisha's talking from a practitioner side, so probably it's beneficial for me to talk from the business support side as well. We're following the same lines, so they need a purpose and a reason to come in, because some of it is also down to the individual. So, as Natasha says, I've got staff who are in, some are in 5 days a week, because for them, that's what suits. They switch off when they've left work and home's home. Others come in when there's a need to come in, but there is a minimum. We've said a minimum of at least 2 days a week. Most now, what they're now seeing is the benefit of coming in, that interaction with the social workers, with the other people within there. They're now getting into more of a rhythm. So we're getting a bit of a peak. So when there is a team meeting, everybody tends to come in on that one day. But what we're doing is allowing them to see the benefit of coming in rather than us dictating, because the more we dictate, the more people will probably push back, because they'll say, well, I was comfortable doing it from home through COVID and you were comfortable with that. Why now are you trying to force me to come back in? What we're trying to do is give them a reason to come back in. And what we're now seeing, I believe, because I've been out to all the districts over the last few weeks, is we're seeing that peak of people now starting to filter back in.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sutton.
Yeah, just one other little point on that, and it's been spoken about earlier on, I think, in Tasha's presentation, and that is around the workforce issues that not only we face as an organisation, but I don't think there's many organisations out there that are not having difficulty getting staff, and staff are able to move around, go to places where they like. One of the benefits a lot of staff see is being able to work flexibly. So I think it's important that our offer that we have to staff to keep them and to attract them, is something that they want. Even though I take on board everything that has been said, I do think there is a balance, because I think staff do see that as an importance. And one of the issues that we have faced and has made transformation difficult is not having enough staff, not because there's not enough in the system as such, but difficulty in filling the vacancies that we had. So I think we've got to be very, very mindful of that.
No, thank you for that. Councillor McMahon.
Paul made a very good point about folk perhaps not pulling their weight when they're at home. But there's another side to this as well, and that's people working longer hours at home. Microsoft did a piece of work, and they determined that a third of people who work from home, who are working in the office prior to the pandemic, are now working longer into the evenings. Now that can't be good for them. It can't be good for their family life and all the rest of it. They think it's because meetings are too easy to organise in the clutter of the day. That's as may be, but I think there's another side to this. Whether working from home is particularly good for people. And for instance, I have a time of day, I have a time in the afternoon where I switch this wretched thing off, I switch the other one off, that's it. And I think one's got to be able to do that, or it can lead to difficulties.
Councillor Snape.
I know that's a fact because my civic officer and Mike Bradbury, who's another civic officer, I often email them 11 o'clock at night thinking they'll answer it next morning. And I get a response within 10 minutes. And that shouldn't be happening, really. So I've now stopped doing that for them. And I've said, I don't need an answer. It's just so when you come in the morning, whatever you're doing, you can answer me. But I've had responses back at midnight, and that shouldn't be happening. So I agree 100% with Johnny on that one.
May I be so bold as to say, you should ask yourself the question, why are you sending the damn things at 11 o'clock at night?
Often because I've been to civic functions, I don't get home till 11 o'clock at night. I've got things come in, so I'm trying to answer them, so they can come back to me. So it goes with a roll of chair, but I'm sorry.
Tracy, I think you wanted to add something.
And I would respond, that's something, what both of you have commented, we are really mindful as managers, and as Natasha said, in your one-to-one conversation, so your wellbeing conversation, we will have that conversation around how many hours are you working, why are you emailing at that time, and what we've done is give each other permission to hold that mirror up to say, why did you send that to me at 10 o'clock at night? But when the individual then says, because I've got to take my child for a hospital appointment the next day, so I was catching up, they're not in work that day, actually that's the whole point of flexi time. What we have to be really mindful of is back to your point around well-being. So for me, part of the skill of a manager is understanding why that person is either working the hours they're working or staying at home. Are they actually masking something in the sense of they don't want to come back into the office, which we would then see, if that makes sense. So it is about, giving managers the skill set to ask those right questions, probe those questions, but build that relationship with that individual where they can be honest and say, but it's given us permission to challenge each other about why are you answering at that time of night? Because I think it's as a society, it's not just us as a local authority, we all feel we've got to be available 24/7. And we haven't, for our own mental health, we need to, as Johnny said, switch those things off, because then you recharge ready for the next day.
Thank you for that. Just a general question, if I could. I know this, it's a hugely important, but also a hugely expensive area of business, isn't it? And we need to get this right. And, correct me if I'm wrong here, but part of the objective of this update meeting is about us having some reassurance that the function is moving in the right direction. And if I could just comment on a couple of things that were in the presentation. We were talking about co-production, and a lot of organisations realised that actually co-production with all of the partners is the most effective way of delivering the service, yet co-production was one of the three things that this local authority was criticised about at the last inspection. What we're trying to achieve needs a level of cultural change, and I think we all recognise how difficult it is to change culture. And in fact, when we've looked at things like SEND, as I understand from what the presentation said, is that we found that the provision wasn't right and we've changed it. Now, is that indicative of the way that we were working previously? We seem to put all of our eggs in the restorative practice basket, which by definition is difficult to achieve. And then we were talking also, I mean, if we get that right, that should be quite transformational, shouldn't it? We should see some significant reductions in people coming in and increases in those going out. We also then, I think he talked about cohort analysis to make sure that we were analysing everything that we were doing to make sure that it was right. And right at the very end, I think Natasha described the business support as clunky. Against that backdrop of a clunky system, all of our eggs into something that we're not sure is working, other than we do have some anecdotal examples that it's working, against a history of being criticised for things like co-production. And I know it's a work in progress, but where's the reassurance in all of this? Councillor Sutton.
I'll start, and I'm sure Nisha will want to continue. If we start with the co-production thing, I mean that specific comment came out of the inspection around special education needs, and in that light, co-production is, there's lots of parts involved in educational health and care plan and in that additional provision. So it's co-production between the SEND workers who are doing that, with the children's social care when they have an input, with health and different parts of health, with schools, 400 odd schools, and with parents and carers of those young people. And it's co-production between all of that, which is not easy, because you could easily get one part of that saying, well, they didn't listen to me, or the others agreed, but they didn't listen to me. And we've done a lot of work, particularly around the parent forum, in being able to get that across of what we're doing around co-production and get that right. I don't think the criticisms around co-production are necessarily transfer over to what we've been doing in children's social care. But part of the transformation system of bringing everything onto a district footprint, one of the overall aims from that is, in effect, there is more co-production, because one of the things that we've constantly been told, and members of this committee will have heard this many times, is that I had to tell my story, I had to give my details to dozens of different professionals, which is always going to be a difficult thing when people work for different organisations. But what we shouldn't have is that happening in the same organisation, you know, and having the SEND workers, the education psychiatry, and all the rest, and all the other teams of children's social care working within the same area under the same district lead, who has got oversight of the whole system. I still think that is the absolute right way to go. And I'm absolutely convinced that, particularly under the leadership of Neelam and the 3 ADs that we have in place at this moment in time, that things are beginning to go completely in the right direction. And although it can't just rely on the initial figures, the figures for children coming into care, if we take out the UASC, are going absolutely in the right direction. And that's not because we've made it any more difficult for children to come into care. Those thresholds are exactly as they were. But that culture is starting to change amongst the teams about intercare is not the first option. It's about working with that family and other partners to do what we can to try and support that family and get that family to do what they need to do. But I make no qualms about saying that if a child meets the threshold and safeguarding they need to come into care, they will need to come into care. But then the other question is, when they need to come into care, is very much then residential care should not be the first option. It should be foster care, kinship, whatever else, and only residential care if that has to be the only option. But I'm sure Nisha might want to add something to that.
Thanks, Mark. So in terms of co-production, I think Mark articulated it really well. For SEND, yes, there was a direction that we have to adhere to, and we are making great strides into it. But within children's system, co-production, that is something that we have brought in every part of our planning for children, right from an early help stage through to social care. Because the aspiration of transformation was district-based service, so help at the right place, at the right time, at the earliest opportunity. And the model, it provides us opportunities for exactly that. District lead having oversight with the partnership locally and driving it for all children within that district. Again, and you know, we, like Natasha talked about, the MASH, we are looking at, that is an opportunity. Initially, MASH sits at a tier 4 level. Now we have an opportunity to re-look at how we organize ourselves for that co-production, for that sharing of information. And our aspiration is to bring it down at tier 2 level, probably. Why not have that earliest opportunity discussion where school, health, everybody has that conversation in the community, comes up with the right plan, rather than having that at tier 4 level. You've already missed the boat. Restorative practice is the way we conduct ourselves, the way we problem solve. So that is how we want people to behave, to problem solve, to lead and to manage. But people can only do that if they have got the time, the headspace, the right skill level to do that, because otherwise it will fall flat. And also the right partnerships to do that, to achieve that. So again, within this transformation, where we are in embedding it, we are working on all these different aspects. So workforce steering group is making sure we have the right people in the right places and the right numbers, so that they have the headspace to work with the families that they need to work with at all tiers, not just at tier 4 highest level. And then the partnerships, we are challenging ourselves in various boards that we have to say, come on, what are we doing? How are we achieving? It's not just about local authority, it's about all partners working together with the same vision and trying to achieve the same impact. So it's bringing it all together, and that is the culture change we are trying to achieve through this district model at every level. It's not just in social work, it's in education, it's in well-being, it's in early help, in schools, everywhere. So those are the things. Business support, probably, Tracy, you can take that up.
Can I just come back on one point there? And I think the question I was trying to ask is that we have agreed that the way forward sounds right? This transformational process. We've also agreed that it is difficult to do and challenging to do. And in fact, I think you just mentioned there that you have an ambition to bring some of that decision making down. I think you said to level 2. My question though is, at what stage do we get some definitive statistics, numbers that actually reassures us that all of our thoughts that we're heading in the right direction actually are, and we're not, you know, sort of kicking around in the reeds and actually fooling ourselves with regard to this? And I also have some slight difficulty with now what appears to be the removal of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children out of the figures, because whilst, you know, we say if we take those out it would be coming down, but actually they're in there, aren't they? We can't take them out. And actually, if the volume is going up, then all of our transformational stuff, when it's used on those young people it's likely to work on, is going to be watered down because the sheer volume of people in the system is constantly rising. So, and again, I come back to where's the reassurance? It sounds good. It sounds great. Don't get me wrong. And we have a warm feeling around how all of this is going forward, how we treat our staff, how we adopt a transformational change process. I just fear, are we going to fall flat on our face at some stage and think we've done all of that, but at the moment the figures still keep going up? That's the acid test, isn't it? Where are the figures coming down, and are they coming down significantly enough, statistically significantly enough, for us to say this is as a result of our actions, which have cost a lot of money, therefore we're getting value for money from it? I hate to labour the point, but we're all sitting agreeing that it's the right way forward. But where's the definitive evidence that it's the right way forward? Mark.
So if we can, first of all, talk about figures. So a part of the agreement for the additional investment that we've had that was approved at full council, in effect through the MTFS last week, is that every quarter, informal cabinet will receive a report on how things are going forward. So there's lots of things, there's lots and lots of things you could measure, aren't there? One of the important things to measure would be how many agency workers have we got? Is the extra investment, one of the aims was that we had less agency staff, because we've got more of our own staff. More of our own staff brings stability, same social workers working with the same families, all that, less movement, and as well as reduced cost. There's how many children, are subject of neglect, how many children are then go to the higher level, and that's for child protection, and ultimately how many children come into care. And I think we have a reasonably good performance matrix that I don't see in detail, but I see the headlines that will be able to show that going forward. But the thing is less children subject of child protection a good thing or a bad thing? You know, if that goes up, does it mean we're doing things better and we're identifying the cases, or is it things are worse? You know, and I'm not going to argue, but I think you can see it from both sides. But the other point I wanted to raise is about the unaccompanied children seeking asylum and why we make reference to taking those out. Probably for the last 3 years, that figure has been particularly stable at around 40. In the last 3 months, it's gone to 90. And they are mainly children who, well, not mainly, but a lot of those are children that have gone to hotels that we've now coming to our care. So that is very different. That was never envisaged when we went into transformation or anything like that. And we, as an authority, have absolutely no control over that. One would hope the other children coming into care, because of what we're doing, we have had some control over that because we've been working with those families, etc. So I think it is useful to produce those figures without those children unaccompanied asylum seekers, that we have absolutely no control as an authority over those figures at all. Otherwise, I don't think you'll be seeing a true figure, particularly as we've had such a massive rise recently.
Thank you. Tracy, I think you wanted to come in.
So I just wanted to answer your point around the clunkiness that Natasha mentioned within the presentation. And for me, it's because we're in that transition phase. So we got the transformation, we got the plan. We're now understanding how we want it to be structured, new ways of working. With that has a knock on them for the support that's provided to social workers. What are the systems? What are the processes? And that's the bit that we're going through. That at the minute, it feels quite clunky for the staff because we used to work this way. We now recognise this is a better way of working, but our systems are still this way. So how do we then make that transformation over and that's where I believe at the minute the clunkiness for the staff feels, because we're still in that transition. We haven't got to that stable point yet.
No, thank you. That's really reassuring. I think, I can't see any other hands up. Councillor Snape. Oh, sorry.
Nisha used the word aspiration. That's one of my favourite words, because that's what this is all about, aspiration of children. So it's great. But often families who have no aspiration, it's not just the parents, it's obviously grandparents. A lot of our children there because of bad parenting. And the parents are bad because their parents are bad. And then when we go back to the kinship issue, we can often be putting children with bad grandparents. So it's a vicious circle, really. It just really, okay, as we get older, we may look smarter, we may look better, but if we were bad parents 30 years ago, we're still probably bad parents now. It can be a con at times. It's just to ensure that's not happening, really, and we're going down too much kinship where we could be putting children back in danger. I mean, I did say that 4 years ago, Mark will know, when this was all going to go through, but it's still a worry for me, I'm sorry.
Councillor McMahon?
This may be nonsense, but it just struck me when you were talking. This co-production piece, I think it's about structure, it's about process, and also about culture. And in Silicon Valley, they do these things called hackathons, where they get people from all the different departments, or whatever they call them, with no agenda. And they just do it. And some interesting stuff comes out of that. And I would have thought a multidisciplinary hackathon in the various areas, and it could be hybrid, so that those who try and encourage people to come in, but those who genuinely can't come in I think that would air difficulties, would bring stuff up, would also air some positive stuff, and I just find that whole approach quite intriguing. You've already done it.
Tracy, I'm glad you've offered to answer the question about a multidisciplinary hackathon. That was something I've... over to you.
So there is a paper that's going to informal cabinet around, and we're probably calling it innovation challenges. So what we're looking at is what are those wicked problems that we've got to solve, and let's get that multidiscipline set of people in to help us with no, obviously a bit of a guideline, but this is the problem we're trying to solve, but literally leave them to then work it through as a very short period, task and finish groups. We're looking at some of the problems. So I know climate change is one of the examples that they're looking at, but bring some subject matter experts in as well outside of the organisation, but also maybe the public, or so at the minute it's a gem of an idea that they're looking at that's going to inform a cabinet to say, okay, is this something that could work? If so, how would we manage it? It can be a bit of a monster, because I've seen it in the past, where it can then just, if you don't give it any guidelines, how do you stop the scope creep just becoming this big and the problem they're trying to solve? So at the minute, that's the bit that we're just working through to say, what is that wicked issue that we're trying to solve, because they are very complex.
Thank you for that. I am aware that many organisations try that, and there's something called Hoyer tables you might want to look at, which is a means of achieving that outcome. Were there anyone? No? As I say, I think it's a really useful update. It does feel like we're going in the right direction, and thank you for all the reassurance about that quite extensively about our staff, and also about the service that we deliver. And I think I do feel reassured now I've heard those updates. So thank you again, and thanks for coming. On the possible working group inquiry day activity. I think what we certainly, I'll hand over to Helen in a minute, but one of the requirements of all of the scrutiny panels was to be more proactive and look at various things that we think we ought to do. I know I made a suggestion some time ago, following on from Ofsted's recent report about certain vulnerable children not being in school, and their point being, if they're not being in school, they're not subject to what the school is doing about safeguarding, and they're likely to be those kids that we are concerned about, that are known to other agencies, and it's sort of a recipe for disaster. And seeing as Ofsted raised it in a report last year, I do wonder whether that's something we should be exploring actively. I also think, Johnny, when you were talking earlier about hearing the voices, not hearing voices, but hearing the voice of the child, whether, and again, I'm just thinking out loud, picking up from the conversation we had there, should we be more proactive about trying to do some of that? Some of the members, I don't think there's anyone here that went with me, but we invited some of the carers, young people carers in, and that was a real eye-opener for me. It was an incredibly emotional experience, I personally found. I discovered I was a young carer as well after I'd listened to them. And I do wonder whether we ought to be, I don't know how we achieve it, but how do we create some of that work around hearing the voice of young people? These are just suggestions. I suppose I'm opening the floor to see what else maybe could be possible working group inquiry day activity. We don't want to do them just for the sake of doing them, but I do think it's a valuable part of what these committees are about. So it's the start of a process. A, do you think it's useful? B, do you think there are some quick wins? What could we be looking at? What could we be doing? And if we're met with a barrage of stuff to do, then how do we prioritise it? What's important? What are our objectives, I suppose? And I'll stop there.
Helen will remember 5-6 years ago, it's not the kids that we know about often who's the problem, it's kids we don't know about. There's more than 1,000 children across the county, perhaps even more now, who aren't registered in schools, they never have been, they're home educated, we just don't know who they are, where they are. And it is a difficult problem, I mean, to assess them, because in many cases we just don't know who they are. And of course, with kids now, as we know, who are, or children, who are being permanently excluded, and the numbers are going up as well on a regular basis, who perhaps don't go to the PRU or whatever, they just stay at home, roam the streets. We can give them all the work we like, but if their parents don't have aspirations, as I mentioned before, they're never going to have aspirations. So it's really, where do we stop with the children? I mean,
that's right. I think one I won't bother, you can hear me, I'm sure. When we came on automatically? Oh, of course, we're being recorded, aren't we? I do apologise. What's the sort of bite-sized chunks of what we can achieve? You know?
I don't know if there's any understanding or monitoring of safeguarding issues among the travelling community. It's a very sensitive area. But things like school attendance, I mean, I don't want to be culturally prejudiced. That's the difficulty with them. But at the end of the day, we're still responsible for those who are within our boundaries, that they're safe. It's difficult, but it's just something that struck me.
To be fair, I think if it was easy, we would have decided long before now, wouldn't we? I do wonder whether the starting point might be the Ofsted report from last year, because that's auditable, isn't it? And that's something we can say we're responding to. And then if that highlights or picks up any of the other issues that we're talking about, then maybe we could then legitimately start looking at those rather than use them as just something we've picked out of the air that might carry with it that accusation of cultural inappropriateness. Paul?
Just going back to the report myself and Helen did all those years ago, basically there were two centres across the county. One was Stafford Borough and one was Cannock District. And the travelling children, the girls left school at 10, and as puberty was starting to come, they didn't want them to go to school and learn the wrong things, and the boys left at 11 to go and work with Dad. And that was the way it was really then, if you remember, Helen, wasn't it, in that report? So it is a problem, and at least with those children, we know who they are. We know that they've dropped off the register, so we should be able to follow that up. But it's the kids who never went there. And there are travellers' kids who never go in the first place. But they're normally on a fixed site, as they've got in Stafford and as they've got in Cannock.
Jill?
It concerns me about these Ofsted reports because I think everybody gets too much notice that Ofsted are coming in, and a lot of things can be covered up because they know that somebody's coming in and they know that they're going to look at a certain thing, so something can be put away or something can be quickly added to a file to make it look okay, and I just don't agree with being pre-warned. When I worked in care years ago, I was manager at care homes and various things, in a children's home, we didn't get any notice. There would just be a knock on the door one day, in they'd come, they'd just go through everything, they'd be there 2 or 3 days, and that was the Ofsted report. Now, you get 2 or 3 days notice where you can draft people in, you can cover things up, and I just don't agree with it at all.
Mike?
I think, Chair, if we're looking for work, and I think the first starting point should be the Ofsted report, because that's obviously highlighted where there are concerns, rather than us looking things that perhaps there aren't concerns of them spending valuable time looking at something that actually isn't a problem. I think we need to try and look at that and pick perhaps one or two items from there that we could perhaps do a bit more work into.
Yeah, I think what we'll probably do then is try to draw up some terms of reference around what that looks like. If it's a working day, I've never experienced anyone of either of these things before, but I assume an inquiry probably has some longitudinal plan around it, whereas a day, is that just as the name suggests, we invite a load of people in and we run some sort of seminar?
I think one of the absolute joys of scrutiny is that you can dictate how you do that piece of work. So you do need to have, I think, very clear terms of reference, an idea, and not have those too broad. If it's a large topic, I think it works better if you chunk it up so that you've got a piece of work that you're doing and you're coming to a conclusion, and then you take the next piece of work. An inquiry day tends to be where you get everybody in the room together, so external experts, internal experts, and the members as well. The good thing, the useful thing about that is everybody's in the room together, so you're all listening and debating the issues together, and that's quite helpful. A working group, you tend to see people over a period of time and they're not all in the room together, but it depends what, you know, what the idea, what the topic is. If just going back to the Ofsted report, we have actually got in April a report coming to this committee which is looking at permanent exclusions and the Ofsted. So probably that's the starting point once you've heard the information from that report, and that came as a consequence of, I think you'd been to the Children's Improvement Board, hadn't you, Chair? So following on from that, we've invited them to come and bring a report. That will be Carl Hobson, in fact, who you will know, Mr. Snake, won't you? And he will be coming to deliver that. That's our next meeting. So maybe at the end of that, that will be the prompt then for whether or not you feel there's some further work to be done. And if there is, you know, how broad that is, which areas you want to look at particularly.
No, thank you. I think that's really useful. So if we all agree, then maybe we wait until after that, and then we look at any other work. The only other point I was going to make as well is, and I sometimes am guilty of forgetting this, we're not only the Safeguarding Committee, we are legitimately the crime and disorder panel for Staffordshire. And given the fact that our police force is currently in what would be special measures if there were a school, it tends to suggest that all things aren't perhaps as they should be. And again, without trying to open a floodgate of bits and pieces, I also think maybe we ought to have something around crime and disorder. I know that there is a plan that the Chief Constable wants to deliver pan Staffordshire about improving how they deal with local communities. I'm a little concerned. I don't know if you've had the same notification, but you know, we used to be able to report things by telephone to the police. Now you probably can't. We then went through Facebook and Twitter options. All that has now gone, as I understand it. And now the only way you can report something is on live chat or 101. And I do think as a starting point, I personally don't think that's acceptable, and maybe that would be something that we could have a look at that would have an impact on our local communities, because that's what I hear from residents about, and I hear tales of people saying we give up on trying to contact the police because you can't unless it's 999. So again, just a suggestion, but if you think there are more pressing crime and disorder issues, then please give it some thought. Paul?
I spoke to Chris Noble the second day in force in December. Then we've got the new policing model that's come across with 2 for Stoke, then 1 policing model for each of the different districts. And but it was meant to start on the 1st of June. I think actually started on the 1st of July. So it's been running now for over 6 months. And I've got to be fair, I've seen no change in how we're policed. In Cannock, I think we've even got less police officers. Well, I've not seen one in the town centre anywhere, so I would gladly go along with that, whether it be in April or whether it be later on in the year. I know how busy this working agenda gets.
So, a few meetings ago, when the peer report came out, there was some concern in this Review and Scrutiny Committee and a request that we would need to meet with the Commissioner. The Chairman and along with the Chair of the Police, Fire and Crime Panel had a discussion with the Commissioner, because obviously there's some overlap there and we want to avoid duplication. As a result of that, there is a meeting next week, I think it's the Tuesday afternoon, is it? Yeah. That the Chairman's been invited to. It's a special meeting of the Police, Fire and Crime Panel, which is looking at that report. But also during that meeting, the Commissioner, because originally we were wondering if we ought to do a joint meeting, weren't we? The Commissioner said that he would be happy to come to this committee at some point in the future. What we haven't done is arranged that, because the agreement was that they'd have the meeting with the Police, Fire and Crime Panel first. So from Tuesday, hopefully you'll get a better idea. I've got penciled into my calendar that I need to arrange a meeting for the Commissioner. It was the Commissioner, and there was somebody who was going to bring with him, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But in my head, I wondered whether we'd pencil that in for some time, it may be September. But I think before we go and get the date, what I would need is some idea of the areas that you would want to be discussing with him, so that's there.
I was on this committee previously where we had the Commissioner, previous one, and the previous Chief Constable, and they came before us, and the Commissioner blamed the Chief Constable for everything, and the Chief Constable blamed the Commissioner for everything. So I think if we're going to do it, we've got to have both here now at the same time. So if the Commissioner blames the Chief, we can say, well, Chief, what's your views? Because if you remember last time, the Chief races said nothing, had his head down all the time. We had the Matthew Ellis, who was the Police Commissioner, and he just, no, that's operational, that's administration. And it really got as bad as that. We got nothing out of him.
I think, first of all, let's see what Tuesday brings. Yeah. But then I do wonder whether this suits something like an inquiry day where we set up a group of people and then have those two in to ask the relevant questions of. That feels probably right to me then, rather than anything else. Mike?
I think in the first instance, not subsequently perhaps, but in the first instance, I think it suits an informal inquiry day, so that everybody can be a bit more candid than they would be in public. There does come a time where it's feet to the fire in a public setting, but I think at the outset, in order to get a feel of what's going on, because it's a huge issue, I think, it's better in an informal inquiry day first. I'm not shying away from, but I do think that's the best start. Yeah, okay, good.
Mike?
Just on that, Chairman, I think if we are inviting these people to come along in an informal inquiry day, we've got to make sure that we get better attendance from members of this committee, I think. Because I think it's poor if we don't, and these people turn up and there's only half the committee here. And I know it's an issue you've talked about before.
Can I just address that point first? I do wonder, and we constantly come up against this difficulty, don't we, that where does our responsibility start and end, and where does the police commissioners panel, group, where do their responsibilities start and end? Because we can't seem to get an agreement other than we'll talk together. But talking about people being here, I wonder whether it ought to be a joint inquiry, informal inquiry day, so we invite them as well. So we address the issue that we've got a bigger group of people, but also we recognise that there is some difficulty around the definition of who's supposed to be doing what, because if I'm honest, I'm still a little unclear about that. Sorry, Paul wanted.
I agree with what Johnny said 100%, and I was going to suggest what you've just said now. But if we do, or when we invite the chief and the commissioner in, we give them notice of the questions, definitely, so that we're not leaving them cold. They can do whatever research, because it doesn't matter who you are and what top of any organisation. You don't know everything, but other people can assist you. So whatever we do, we give them advance warning.
I also think it's important for it to be informal as well. I think that would be a really useful starting point. Johnny?
The subsequent formal setting can be a joint affair as well. We did joint of safeguarding and health on a couple of occasions. Health is so big, we filled more than half the council chamber. But it worked quite well, and people seem to think and everybody got a say, and it was a good session. And that might be something you might want to consider. It's not easy to chair, mind.
Thank you for that. That sounds like two plans, and we'll have to write the terms of reference up. Anything else on that item? Item 7 then, the work programme. Helen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So one or two, quite a lot of actions actually after the meeting in January that I just wanted to report back to you on. Both the safeguarding, Staffordshire Safeguarding Adult Partnership Board had a couple of actions that you asked them to take forward, or they agreed to take forward. The first one was about more sophisticated data analysis for future reports, and I just wanted to let you know that they've actually gone to the County Council's performance team to ask for advice on the best way forward. If you remember, they said that the part of the problem for them is that they're collating information from a number of people, and some of them haven't perhaps got the sophisticated data analysis or as sophisticated data analysis. So they're looking into ways of improving that. And then the other one was to how to consider online abuse and how that could be more clearly identified in future reports. And they have, in fact, arranged a multi-agency audit of online abuse as a direct consequence of that query, which is nice to hear, which is being held on the 30th of March. So once that's happened, I'll get back to them and ask them for some feedback on that. So that was worth noting, I think. For the children's annual report, I contacted their independent chair. He has, because we had a couple of pieces of information, we asked for some information on teenage pregnancy, on the work that was being done on that, and he said that he would come back to us with that information. He also had, we also mentioned about online abuse and sexual harassment in education. And again, I forwarded the report that we did on that for him, so he's got that details. And then again, the 5 Rights campaign that you brought up, Mr. McMahon, and he was going to take that back to the board and discuss the work that they're already doing. He says that he has made inquiries and he will come back to us as soon as he's got further detail on that. So that's ongoing. The other one was we'd agreed that a letter would be sent to the ambulance service, haven't we? And I know that you've discussed that with the Chair of Health, haven't you? So I don't know whether you wanted to update members on what's happening with that.
I think the issue with that was that the Chair of Health had already organised a meeting of not only ambulance providers or administrators, but other, I'm just trying to think what it was, but there were other people as well. And he just asked me to hold fire until that meeting had happened, and then perhaps we do a joint letter between the two of us rather than me just do it solely from what was raised at this committee. So if members are happy with that, we'll do that.
Then a query to yourselves, really, because another issue that was raised in January was a request that you took part in the hidden abuse training, But I wanted to clarify with yourselves whether because there was a discussion whether that was something that ought to be organised for all council members or whether it was just this committee. If it's just this committee, then I think Ruth Martin would be able to organise for you to take part in the training that's already established, which she puts on for staff. Yep. But obviously, if it's all members, then we'd need to organise a separate. So it's which you think is the most appropriate, really.
In a role that I've been asked to take on around members, part of the feedback that I've had is that some members think there's too much training and the training is too involved. So I do wonder whether a pragmatic way forward is for just us to have that training. And then if we think there's a benefit to everyone else, we make a suggestion rather than put another burden of more training on everyone.
Okay, that's lovely. So what I'll do is I'll get in touch with Ruth, see what training she's got organised, and then let you know the dates. Then two very quick things then. From today, the action I've taken it that we need to organise a meeting with yourself, Mr. McMahon, I don't know whether you as well, Chair, and the Cabinet members to look at the letter, drafting the letter that we're going to do as a result of the Spotlight Review. So I'll be in touch with some dates for that. And then finally, you'll be happy to know, so we have one last meeting in April for this municipal year. The next, the first meeting of the new municipal year is in June. We've already got a couple of items scheduled in, one of which is another update on transformation. What we often do at the beginning of a new municipal year is work programme planning, and sometimes within that we invite directors and or cabinet members to put forward a brief presentation of the current issues. And it's a query to you, is that what you'd like me to do? Bearing in mind, though, that one of the items that's already on is an update on transformation, which is sort of Mr Sutton covering that area to a certain extent already.
I suppose one of the issues for me, and aside from this meeting, there was going to be a third item here today, wasn't there? Yes. And it was pulled at very short notice. And the request was that it went to the April or went to the other. And I raised it at corporate overview and scrutiny because if we don't stick to the dates when things should be done, I don't think there's any momentum for people to get that work done and the timescale slips. Plus the fact then we have a backlog of trying to fit these things in. And I think the April one is already packed with bits and pieces. And this was described today without the third report being in. This today was described as a really light agenda, and we're now 2.25 hours in. And I do think that we've had the right level of debate today. So I think there's some consideration, certainly that I think I need to have around resisting large agendas that actually we can't give the right amount of scrutiny and thought to, because it surprises me that we're still here at 12:15. So with your permission, I might take that with Helen and move that forward, and just to see how we can best do that. I have had some reassurance now that when people are asked for reports, then we're going to try as hard as we possibly can to stick to the dates. Johnny.
There was occasions I had too much on my agenda when I was Chair for Health, in the attempt of having fewer meetings, because we seem to have more than everybody else, and it simply didn't work. You felt you came away empty-handed for everything. So I'm keen that it's few and we can really get stuck into it. I thought today's been good.
Thank you. Anything else on the workforce planning? No. No item 8, I'm assuming? No. Lovely. You did mention right part way through, Helen, that there were some joys of scrutiny. I don't know what they quite are. But thank you very much for doing that. Thanks for coming along. Bye-bye.